They opened a casket because of the dog. You won't believe what they found. The dog's barking echoed between the gravestones, growing more insistent with every second. Max was inconsolable. In the middle of the ceremony, the pastor paused his eulogy. Max was pulling his leash so hard, it seemed like he might break free. Everyone was in shock. A dog so well trained, why was he acting like this? The guests exchanged nervous glances. Something felt off. The casket was closed, but Max wouldn't take his eyes off it. It was as if he knew something no one else could sense. Then came the question that changed everything. Why is he acting like this? The answer would lead to one of the most unbelievable moments of their lives. A cold wind swept through the cemetery, carrying the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the dry aroma of newly turned soil. Around the casket, a heavy silence lingered, broken only by the faint rustle of trees and the hushed murmurs of those gathered, until Max shattered the stillness. The first bark, hoarse and sharp, made heads turn. The second was louder, more urgent, like an echo that refused to fade. Max tugged at his leash with such force that his paws scraped the damp grass, leaving marks behind. "Shh, boy, calm down," murmured the police officer, holding the leash, trying to soothe him. But Max didn't seem to hear. His gaze was fixed on the casket, his muscles tense, chest heaving. He barked with a nearly human urgency, as though desperate for someone to understand what he couldn't express. The tension was palpable. Everyone watched the dog, unsure what to do. Some tried to rationalize the scene. "He must miss Michael," one woman said, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Others just stood silently as Max continued his struggle. His claws scraped the ground, and his whole body seemed to vibrate with the need to get closer to the casket. The pastor hesitated for a moment, looking at the dog with a mix of pity and unease. When he tried to resume speaking, his voice faltered, drowned out by the barking that now filled the air. Michael Harris had been a hero, a dedicated officer who risked his life countless times to protect others. The funeral was meant to be his final farewell, a solemn moment of shared grief. But Max was turning it into something entirely different. The dog's gaze, fixed and intense, seemed to scream what words couldn't. He wasn't mourning a loss. He was issuing a warning. "Why is he acting like this?" someone in the crowd asked. The murmurs grew louder. Unease spread like an invisible wave among the mourners. Someone tried to approach Max, but the dog recoiled, barking even more furiously, his frustration as clear as the gray sky above. One of Michael's closest friends, Sergeant Thompson, leaned in to get a better look at the dog. "He's never acted like this before," Thompson said, his voice low and heavy with concern. Thompson was a skeptical man. In years on the force, he had seen just about everything, but he never thought a dog could cause such a commotion. Deep down, though, something about the scene unsettled him. It felt like Max truly knew something no one else could imagine. The next few minutes dragged on. People whispered among themselves, but Max didn't relent. He kept barking, pulling on his leash, as if he wanted to claw the casket open himself. Finally, someone voiced the unthinkable. Could there be something wrong with the casket? The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Even the wind seemed to stop, as if the cemetery itself was holding its breath. The commanding officer looked at Sergeant Thompson, then at Max. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. "Open it." The officers approached cautiously. When the lid was lifted, the air seemed to freeze. No one knew what to expect, but no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what they found inside. Max was right. Max wasn't an easy dog. When he arrived at the precinct in 2017, he looked more like a survivor of war than a future hero. He was thin, patches of his fur were missing, and his eyes carried a mix of distrust and exhaustion. His past traumas had turned him into a shadow of the dog he used to be. His former handler, a seasoned officer, had been killed during a raid to stop an armed gang. Max had been there when it happened. He had barked, tried to warn them, but couldn't stop the tragedy. That moment changed something in him. In the days that followed, he refused to eat, train, or even interact with anyone. When Max was transferred to Officer Michael Harris's unit, most thought he was broken. "This dog isn't fit for service anymore," some officers said. "He's lost his spirit." But Michael saw something different. He didn't see a broken dog. He saw an animal that was hurt and in need of a chance. From the first moment, Michael recognized Max's potential, but he also knew that earning his trust would be like crossing a fragile bridge. One wrong step, and it could all collapse. The first few days were rough. Max wouldn't let anyone get near him. In the kennel, he growled at anyone who dared to open the door, always retreating to a corner, eyes fixed and alert. But Michael was patient. He understood that trust couldn't be forced. Michael started spending hours sitting by the kennel, saying nothing, making no attempts to interact. He wanted Max to understand that his presence wasn't a threat. In the first few days, Max completely ignored him, but Michael kept coming back morning and afternoon. After a week, Max began to show curiosity. He'd glance at Michael from the corner of his eye, occasionally lifting his head when Michael spoke. On the 12th day, Michael made his first move. He extended his hand and held it still. Max hesitated. He growled softly but didn't attack. For Michael, this was progress. "You can trust me," he said in a calm voice. It was a slow process. First, Max accepted a piece of kibble from Michael's hand. Then, he allowed Michael to touch his head for a few seconds. Each small breakthrough was celebrated as a major victory. Michael gradually began training Max, always respecting his limits. The dog still had moments of hesitation, but something had changed. There was a spark in his eyes, as if he was beginning to believe again. The ultimate test came months later during a high-risk operation. A suspect had injured a civilian and fled into a dense forest. The team needed a dog to track him, but no one wanted to risk using Max. He was still seen as unreliable, but Michael believed in him. "He can do it," Michael told the commander with conviction. "Trust us." As soon as the leash was unhooked, Max sprang into action. He sniffed the ground with precision, undeterred by the obstacles in the forest. In that moment, it was as if Max was finally showing all the potential Michael had always believed in. The chase ended in a direct confrontation. When the suspect tried to ambush Michael, raising a gun at him, Max reacted instantly. He lunged with incredible force, disarming the man before he could fire. The team arrived moments later to make the arrest. Michael knelt beside Max, cradling the dog's face in his hands. "Good boy, I knew you could do it." From that day on, they were inseparable. In training sessions, Max became one of the top-performing dogs in the unit. Off-duty, Michael treated him like family. They ran together, played fetch in the backyard, and shared quiet moments on the couch. This unique bond made Michael more than a handler to Max. He was everything. And now at the cemetery, standing before that casket, Max was determined to show that Michael still meant everything to him. Max's behavior at the funeral was impossible to ignore. Each bark echoed among the gravestones like a cry of anguish. He wasn't just trying to get attention, he was trying to warn them. The officers who knew Max as a disciplined and well-trained dog were baffled. They had never seen him act this way. It wasn't just grief over losing Michael, it was something deeper, something no one could understand. The pastor tried to continue the ceremony, but Max's barking overpowered his words. Some of the mourners whispered comforting words in an attempt to calm the dog, but he wouldn't give up. He kept pulling at his leash, digging into the ground with his paws and staring at the casket, as though he could see something that was invisible to everyone else. "He's in so much pain," said a woman, tears in her eyes. "It's not just pain," Sergeant Thompson, Michael's closest friend, responded. He was watching Max intently, trying to decipher the dog's agitation. "He's trying to tell us something." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. People exchanged uneasy glances, but no one had the courage to voice the thought hanging in the air. What if something was wrong? The precinct commander finally stepped forward. He had worked alongside Max and Michael for years and knew that a dog like Max didn't act this way without reason. "Thompson, what do you think?" he asked hesitantly. Thompson scratched his head, glancing between the casket and the dog. Max was panting heavily, his eyes fixed on the casket, almost pleading for someone to understand him. I think we should open the casket," Thompson said, his voice steady but uncertain. The suggestion shocked everyone. Opening a casket during a funeral felt like an act of disrespect. Family members, friends, and colleagues were all present. How could they justify such an extreme decision? "This is insane," one of the younger officers exclaimed. "We can't do that without a valid reason." "And Max isn't a good enough reason?" Thompson shot back, pointing to the dog, who was now desperately scratching at the ground. The commander hesitated but couldn't shake the feeling that Max was on to something. He nodded toward two officers. "Do it." "What would you do in a situation like this? Would you have the courage to open the casket? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. If you're already part of our community, give this video a like to help spread these incredible tales to more people. The silence that followed was unbearable. Everyone stepped back, forming a circle around the casket. For a moment, Max stopped barking, as if holding his breath along with the humans around him. The officers carefully lifted the lid. As the contents were revealed, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Inside the casket wasn't Michael. The body belonged to another man identified by Thompson as Michael's colleague, who had also been injured in the same operation. Everyone had believed he was the one who had survived, but the confusion caused by the severity of their injuries had swapped their identities. "This can't be true," one of the officers muttered, stepping back and clutching his head. But the disfigured face, unrecognizable from the wounds, left no doubt. They had buried the wrong man. Max, unlike the humans around him, wasn't surprised. He began pulling on his leash again, this time toward the police car. His actions were clear. Michael was still alive. Thompson was the first to act. He grabbed his radio and frantically started making calls to the hospital. The story was convoluted, but the impossible was becoming reality. Michael hadn't died that day. He was alive, critically injured but unable to communicate. The commander stared at Max, astonished. "This dog? He just saved Michael's life." The tension gave way to urgency. The officers rushed to the hospital, following Max's lead as if he knew exactly where to go. When they arrived, the truth was confirmed. Michael was in intensive care, his face bandaged from his injuries. He couldn't speak, but his eyes lit up when he saw Max. The dog sprinted to his bedside, placing his paws on the edge of the bed and licking Michael's hand. It was a reunion none of them would ever forget. Thompson wiped away the tears he couldn't hold back. He tried to tell us the whole time, and we almost ignored him. What began as a day of mourning turned into a celebration of loyalty, instinct, and love. Max wasn't just a dog. He was the reason Michael was alive. Max stayed by Michael's side, as he always had during the toughest times. The hospital, with its cold lights and antiseptic smell, felt like an odd place for such a powerful reunion. Michael could barely move. His face was almost entirely covered in bandages, and he still couldn't speak. But when Max pressed his nose against Michael's hand, something changed. The heart monitor registered a slight uptick, and Michael's once dull eyes filled with life. Thompson, watching the scene alongside the commander, shook his head in disbelief. "He knew all along," he murmured. "This dog is a miracle." Max's eyes locked onto Michael's, as if he were silently saying, "I never left you." He stayed there motionless, his head resting on the bed, as though the rest of the world no longer mattered. Doctors entered the room, drawn by the commotion. One of them stopped beside Thompson, observing Max and Michael with a look of surprise. "I've never seen anything like this," the doctor said. "It seems the patient is responding more to the dog than to any medical stimulus." For Michael, this wasn't just a moment of comfort. It was a turning point. Max had found him, guided by a bond that had been unshakable from the start. Even when everyone else thought he was dead, Max refused to believe it. Max stayed by Michael's side day and night. The hospital made an exception, allowing him to remain there, something rarely permitted. But no one dared to question it. Max's presence seemed as crucial to Michael's recovery as any treatment. As days passed, Michael's condition began to improve. First, he squeezed Max's paw more firmly when they touched. Then, he managed to move his head slightly. Each small step felt like a shared victory between the two. Thompson, always present, described the scene in a message to the precinct. "They're back together." It's like Max knew Michael needed him more than ever. The reunion wasn't just a moment of relief for Michael. It was a testament to Max's incredible intuition and loyalty. The officers who had attended the funeral now spoke about how they had underestimated what Max had been trying to communicate. "We almost ignored him," the commander admitted in a meeting with the team. "He was trying to save Michael the whole time, and we nearly missed it." The story spread quickly throughout the police department. Max became a legend. Reporters arrived at the hospital to document the case, and the public was moved by the story of the dog's loyalty. But Max wasn't interested in the attention. To him, the world around them didn't matter. All he wanted was to stay by Michael's side, protecting him as he had always done. In that hospital room, the commander made a remark that resonated with everyone present. Dogs like Max aren't just partners, they're family. And in this unlikely family, Michael and Max proved that love and loyalty could overcome even death itself. Michael returned home months later, still recovering, but with a newfound perspective on life. He knew he wouldn't be alive if it weren't for Max. As always, Max stayed by his side, watching over him with the same vigilance he showed during missions. Recovery was a long road. Michael had to relearn simple tasks like speaking clearly or walking without assistance. But he was never alone. Max was his constant companion, accompanying him to every physical therapy session, every tentative step, and every small victory. "I couldn't have done it without him," Michael admitted in an interview, with Max lying beside him, his head resting on Michael's foot. Michael and Max's story became more than just a legend within the precinct. It inspired other officers to see their canine partners in a new light, not just as tools in the field, but as beings capable of saving lives in moments of despair and uncertainty. For Michael, though, it all came back to their bond. He remembered the hard days when Max was just a broken, mistrusting dog. Now, that same dog had become his strength, his reason to keep fighting. One day, during a quiet walk in the park, Michael looked at Max and smiled. "You're the best partner I've ever had." Max responded with a look of pure understanding, as if he knew exactly what those words meant. Today, Michael and Max live a quieter life. Michael chose a desk job at the precinct, giving himself more time to heal both physically and mentally. Max, meanwhile, became a beloved figure in community outreach programs, visiting schools and events to show people the value of police dogs. In the end, their experience left an unforgettable lesson. Sometimes true strength isn't in the words we say or the actions we take, but in the silent loyalty of those who stand by us, even when everything seems lost. Max didn't just save Michael's life. He proved that love and trust could overcome any obstacle, even death itself. This story of Max and Michael reminds us that the love and loyalty of a dog can be stronger than any words. They don't just save lives, they teach us the true meaning of friendship and trust. Stories like this show us that animals are so much more than companions. They're angels in disguise in our lives. If you enjoyed this story, I'm sure you'll love the video that's appearing on your screen right now. Click on it to hear another unforgettable story about the incredible impact animals can have on our lives. And don't forget, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories. And if you're already part of our community, give this video a like to help spread these beautiful messages to more people. See you in the next story.